So just give us 1 minute.
morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this October 6, 2021 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. And I want to welcome our board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. Please note that you can follow the State Board of Education on its Twitter page at edstateboard_NC. You can also follow the meeting and see all of our materials online. For our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board committee meetings, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting date when the board will vote on action items. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the staff and students visiting from Rowan Salisbury today. If you're in the audience, would you please stand? Are there any here? Okay, well, when you do get here, we hope you enjoy your time with us in this meeting and your other visits in the capital area later today. We also have a special addition to our team today. Our junior student advisor, Marcella Villasuso Venegas, joins us for a first meeting, and I'll turn to our superintendent for that introduction.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for being here today. It is such a privilege to be able to appoint a student advisor to the state board, and I just wanted to share a little bit about Marcella. Marcella attends Clayton High School in Johnston County, and she plays many sports but is a tennis champ. She is only the second girl from Clayton High School to ever make it to the state championship for tennis. So quite an accomplishment there. She also, in her free time, works with Circle of Friends at Clayton High School and is a lifeguard as well. And what I remember about Marcella's application for this position is that she said she wanted to be a true representation and example of a student to the North Carolina State Board of Education. So if we could all welcome Marcella, that would be great.
Well, welcome, Marcella. We want to extend our warm welcome to you as well as you begin your service, and we look forward to your participation in our work in representing your fellow students. Your voice and that of the students you represent is so important to us, and we look forward to the insights that you'll share about your journey and our students' educational journey. Welcome. Terrific. October is a month highlighting many issues and celebrations relevant to our state's public education strategic plan and guiding principles. While COVID-19 continues to exacerbate the need to focus on student mental health and safety in our schools, our students, administrators, and teachers continue to operate our schools in an ever-changing environment, with many new tasks and protocols being added to their duties, contributing to increased shortages and burnout. So we extend our support and will continue to advocate for the needs of all educators and students during this Mental Health Awareness Week of October 3rd through the 9th. In this and future meetings, we'll continue to develop policies and practices, align resources, and gather pertinent information from national as well as state experts to meet the mental health needs of our public school students and adults, and continue to express our undying faith in their work. Critical to supporting mental health of our public education team are our principals. While we celebrate principals this month during National Principals Month, know that we appreciate, admire, and cherish every one of our principals. Each day you provide the essential leadership in creating positive, uplifting, and safe environments for your students and the staffs that you lead. While the last year and a half have been some of the most challenging of your careers, you never wavered in your commitment and care for every student and staff member on your team. We are grateful and thankful for you, not just in October, but each and every day. You've earned the trust, confidence, and enduring respect of all of us. And while you're leading others, be sure you take some time for yourself, to take care of yourself, so that you can continue to pilot the schools that you lead. Thank you for your selfish leadership, and would you all join me in thanking our principals across North Carolina? Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record, and if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion for approval.
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Keenan. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you. We'll now proceed to today's committee meetings, and I note to the committee chairs and audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be completed tomorrow via roll call vote. We'll begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, and I recognize the chair of that committee, Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis, and good morning, everyone. I share the responsibility for the work of this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine, and we are going to start off today with several items of new business, the first being At-Home Learning and Distinguished Leaders Initiatives preliminary findings. The At-Home Learning is one of our many partnerships formed after schools closed in March of 2020, and this was with UNC-TV. We'll be hearing about how ESSER I funds were used to develop educational programming in 2 phases to support remote learning. This was one of the quickest pivots we did, I think, after things shut down in March 2020. And the second initiative, Distinguished Leaders, was also developed using CARES and ESSER I funding with the purpose of providing support for principals, assistant principals, and instructional coaches working in a remote learning environment, which was unfamiliar to most of them. So I am going to turn this over to Dr. Mullenix to tell us about these 2 excellent programs.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, and members of the board. This is the first of 2 very important and exciting updates. We've talked about the At-Home Learning Initiative several times over the last year. I've lost track of time, year and a half or so. This began with phase 1, and so I want to take us back just a little bit in time. Today I am also joined by several guests, and as we go through the presentation, I'll introduce them as well. So when phase 1 happened, that was right at COVID, and I got a call from my dear friend Freebird, and he called me and said, Angie, I have a great idea that you might be interested in, and I think you'd be great to lead it. Here's the contact. Give David Hupert at UNC-TV, which is now PBS North Carolina, a call. So I called David and I said, okay, what is this? And he said, well, we have some curated content that we'd like to air on TV, but we would like the support of the department to use that content and backwards map it to our state standards as best as possible, and then provide some offline resources. So we worked together, and we were able to do that for several months, and it was fairly successful. And I did report on those findings from that first phase back in late last year. So we kept hearing as we were doing that project that it was really good and it was strong, but it would be stronger if we used North Carolina's teachers to develop that content. And so we were able to access that ESSER I funding and partner with several organizations to include, which it was UNC-TV when this project started. They've rebranded and it's now PBS North Carolina, so they're used interchangeably, not to confuse anyone. So we partnered with several organizations, PBS North Carolina, the Friday Institute at NC State, the UNC Literacy Fellows as part of the UNC system, Wolfpack Works, and then also our own DPI consultants in the Academic Standards Division. And so we partnered together with all of these organizations to develop Phase 2, which was 192 lessons of math and literacy, pre-K-5, that we housed in several different ways, and I'll cover those in just a little bit. And I could go on and on about this project, but the Friday Institute actually developed about a 2-minute video that provides an overview of it. And so that is going to air. And for Phase 2, we did develop it as Classroom Connection. So as you saw in that video, we had all of our partners working together. They truly did transform the Friday Institute into a studio. And the teachers would come in on the evenings and on the weekends to record. Hiller and David at the Friday Institute worked countless hours to try and make this work as best as possible. And it really became an incredible success. So those 192 literacy and math lessons are curated in GoOpenNC by standard. We also have them on the Digital Teaching and Learning YouTube channel, and then you can also access them on the UNC TV or PBS North Carolina website under Classroom Connection. So several different avenues that those can be accessed. And Erin Huggins is on with us, and she is going to cover some of the evaluation findings. We also have on with us David Hubert. So he is with PBS North Carolina, as I mentioned, but I'm going to turn it over to Erin to go over those evaluation findings. Erin?
Hi, thanks so much, Angie, and thank you all so much for having me here today. And so my name is Erin Huggins. I am a research associate at the Friday Institute at NC State and led the evaluation for both Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the At Home Learning Initiative. And today I'm going to be presenting a little bit about the findings from Phase 1. And so the work for this really examined 5 key areas that really focused on the planning and development of lessons, the initial impacts of this work, and the recommendations that we have for some sustainability and scalability of the program moving forward. And you can go on to the next slide. So one of the primary goals of this evaluation was to determine how well the partnerships that were created enhance the creation of high quality lessons and resources to support student learning at home, which eventually merged into supporting students that were back in the classroom. So in phase 2 of the at-home learning initiative, 41 teachers from 22 different counties in North Carolina were recruited to participate in either Classroom Connection or Teacher Time. And 24 of those teachers were purposefully selected to create the Classroom Connection lessons. And that was with the support of the content experts from DPI, NC State, and UNC System. As the lessons were being created, we ensured that they were completely aligned to North Carolina content standards. And for all the literacy lessons, they were also connected to the Science of Reading framework. The lessons were also very thoughtfully adapted for a broadcast audience. We're still on the right slide. For a broadcast audience, with adjustments made to both the content, the activities, as well as some direct instruction techniques that teachers used for their lessons. The lessons were also created in such a way that they could be utilized as standalone resources, both for informal or formal learning, and teachers could also utilize them within their own lesson plans or utilize them as a center or something else like that. While meeting content standards was very critical, the lesson developers also focused on creating engaging lessons that allowed students to make connections to their own lives, that were very easy for caretakers and teachers to use, and provided equitable educational opportunities, especially for those students that lacked reliable internet or digital devices at their home. And Classroom Connections also included some additional accessibility supports, in addition to being provided via broadcast. That included some Spanish translations of videos and resources, accommodations for colorblind individuals, as well as captions for those who are hearing impaired. And we can go to the next slide. And so the evaluation team also examined the extent to which content development and outreach activities increased the capacity of the partners to better support teaching and learning in North Carolina. And these partners collaborated together to design, plan for, implement, and then finally disseminate information about Classroom Connection. And this close collaboration among all of the partners really increased the capacity to extend their reach and provide support for early learners all across our state. Developing lessons also impacted the teachers that developed the lessons' confidence to support young learners in multiple ways. And you can see on the chart to the right, it summarizes open-ended survey responses of these teachers. And you can see that about 40% of them mentioned that participation in the lesson development increased their ability to reach more caregivers and educators. 30% also mentioned their increased ability to focus on the learning needs and outcomes of students. And that participation helped them use and create very engaging resources. And we'll talk a little bit more about those impacts on another slide. The turnaround of this project was quite short. This was put together within just a couple of months, but we did find that the inclusion of the resources that are both online and via broadcast, the collaboration with the partners, and the strategic marketing efforts on the part of PBS really helped to get the word out about the program and reach target audiences in an incredibly short amount of time. And so, looking at impacts, we really only have initial impacts that we can look at, and the true impacts of the program really won't be known for some time. But looking at program reach, for example, as of 2021, the advertisements and media outreach that were shared in various ways appeared for users 26 million times, which I think is huge. Just within the Raleigh-Durham market itself, between March and July of this past year, there were nearly 600,000 views of Classroom Connection on the PBS North Carolina channel. Statewide, there have been over 80,000 families that have tuned into the broadcast programming, not including other online avenues, and then 40,000 views have occurred, or over 40,000 views have occurred on the PBS North Carolina At-Home Learning website. And you can go on to the next slide. So another area of impact that we examined was the external impacts on teachers and students, as well as families. And specifically, we looked at how it enhanced student skills and engagement through the use of Classroom Connection lessons. And so for the teachers that worked to create the lessons, participating in lesson development impacted them in a number of ways. First of all, it prompted them to shift their thinking about how they might engage students from a distance. Several teachers that we talked to also discussed how the experience required them to reflect on the ways that students learn from video lessons as opposed to in-person learning. And many of them also noted that they intended to use the lessons and extension activities in their own classrooms if they weren't already doing that. And all of the at-home learning initiative teachers felt that the lessons positively impacted students' academic achievement. So when looking at caregivers and teachers, we're going to stay on the same slide. When looking at the caregivers and teachers that use these resources more broadly, they felt that the resources were very useful for supporting student learning in general, but specifically the majority of both teachers and caregivers felt that these lessons increased not only student engagement and learning, but also their social emotional well-being, and felt that they also positively impact student skills. Some of these impacts were also observed through virtual site visits that we did with one of the at-home learning initiative teachers, where she incorporated actually another at-home learning initiative teacher's videos into her math lessons. And this classroom teacher, we observed, modeled language that was similar to the at-home learning initiative teacher. She used similar supports, and she provided examples as part of her lesson making, her lesson, which made all of the work very streamlined. The students that were present were all virtual, and during this observation, we saw that they were all highly engaged. They were responding to questions that were being asked of both the classroom teacher as well as the classroom connection teacher. And so within some interviews, several of the teachers that were involved in creation of the lessons also discussed the potential for these videos to serve as models of effective teaching for classroom teachers moving forward. And there's currently 2 publications that are under review that examine both the planning, implementation, and the impacts of the work for the teachers that created these lessons. And we anticipate their publication sometime later in this year, so keep a lookout for that. But in addition to the impacts on students and caregivers related to classroom connection, we also found that, we're still on the other slide. We found that teachers and caregivers tended to refer to PBS resources in general when we talked to them and their positive impact on students. And so we found that this name recognition and the value of PBS as a trusted brand, it emerged as a theme in our evaluations for phase 2, but it also emerged as a theme from phase 1 and other work that we've also done with PBS. And because people tend to trust this brand, they also tend to use and share these resources with other people, and they also tend to feel more confident that the resources they're getting are not just beneficial to support students' academic skills, but they're useful to support the whole child. I'm sorry for that, it was so long. You can go to the next slide. So there were several modifications to the current programming and marketing that were suggested in order to increase the program's impact on the public. And one of those recommendations is simply just to highlight the accessibility supports that are available to families to a greater degree, and that includes the Spanish translations. And we say that because in some discussions with families, we found that while they have been advertised and they're readily available, families didn't always know that they existed. Teachers also commented on the difficulty of accessing some of the videos via DPI's Go Open and See site. They just noted that they needed to click several different links to find the videos. They had a bit of trouble using the search features. And so we're looking at ways that Classroom Connection videos might be housed on PBS North Carolina's Learning Media site. And we're currently in discussions to see if that might be something that would be possible. Also, with students back in school, we feel it would be beneficial to modify the current broadcast schedule by airing additional episodes either after school hours or on the weekends. And then simple extension directions that are geared towards caregivers might also be useful for supporting student learners at home informally. And this could include just some short language for teachers that they could send home, or it could be added to some of the online or over-the-air broadcasts. And again, those should all be in Spanish. And then finally, we had several recommendations for sustaining, scaling, and utilizing the resources. So it's recommended that the videos continue to be available online and available via broadcast. That really is to just ensure that all young learners in North Carolina have access to these high quality resources. We also suggest that diverse promotion of the resources continue just to increase public awareness. One of the best ways we've seen to sustain and scale programs is to share them more broadly with different groups. And several PBS stations across the country are already working with PBS North Carolina to find ways to air their content on their stations. Sharing this with stations would increase not only awareness, but use of the resources, and may also encourage other stations to collaborate with education partners in their states or other PBS stations in the future. Another way to increase awareness of the program would be to partner with other state organizations, such as the Boys and Girls Club and libraries. And this could really help to increase access and use of programming in some of those more informal learning spaces. This would increase not only statewide awareness and value, but also use of classroom connections and its potential sustainability. And then finally, as we were thinking about how, we're still on the same slide. As we were thinking about how carefully these lessons were created and vetted by content experts for their standards alignment, appropriate pedagogical approaches, and research-based teaching frameworks, we feel that there are some other avenues that these could be used. We feel like that potentially these lessons could be leveraged by institutes of education that are preparing pre-K through fifth grade teachers, and they could provide potentially models of teaching that are highly specific to this state. And because the lessons are easily accessible, they're free, would continue to be available once teachers in the classroom, we feel that this could continue to not only provide high quality, engaging instructional content for early learners, but could also reinforce research-based teaching methods that are utilized by colleges and universities across our state. So overall, we feel this program was very successful and has the potential use in many different ways moving forward. So if anybody has any questions about the research or findings, I'll be happy to answer those once the presentation's over.
Thank you, Erin. So Erin definitely highlighted the collaboration and the partnerships. Also, I did underscore a little bit the fact that our consultants here at DPI worked side by side along these teachers developing those lesson plans, and that was truly probably one of the best pieces of this project. It was very iterative where we would go back and forth, but it was just really one of those instructional coaching pieces that happened sort of organically as part of the project. So I just wanted to emphasize that and to say thank you to those consultants. So this project extends beyond its initial term. We definitely utilize those ESSER 1 funds for this project to have it in place, but to also have it as sort of this living legacy as long as those standards are in place for our state as well. If there are any questions on this update, I'm happy to answer those, and so is Erin.
Questions, colleagues? We are trying to keep within our time limit here. So if there's a burning question here, let's hear it. But otherwise, we'll move on to Distinguished Leaders Initiative. Any questions?
Ms. Camden, it's Catherine, just quickly,
Yes.
if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Superintendent.
If I could, thank you so much for this presentation. If I could call your attention to slide 8, I want to make sure that I'm understanding this graph correctly. So the question is, how has participating in the AHLI lesson development and filming impacted the way you support young learners? Am I reading this correctly that, for example, 30% said it provided an increased focus on learner needs and outcomes?
Yes, and those were taken from open-ended responses. So this was not, these were not choices that teachers chose. These were just things that came out of the open-ended responses from a survey.
Okay. I would like to request that the next time we hear about this initiative and as you continue to move forward, that there be something a little more specific that you are looking at from a evaluation standpoint. For example, a specific group, maybe a an evaluation in a rural county that does not have good access to robust Wi-Fi, and how in particular it has helped a specific group of children and in maybe a specific area. I think this is very helpful, but I'm not coming away convinced from what I'm seeing that that students actually benefit. I have no doubt that they benefited during the pandemic because they wouldn't have had access to other things. But moving forward, when students are in school, how will this be beneficial? That's the question that I would like to have answered moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a valid question. One of the issues that we had with the evaluation piece for this program was just the quick nature of the turnaround. So we were conducting the evaluation as this was being shared with people across the state. And so, yes, definitely this is something we would like to look into in the future and really focus on some of those longer term impacts on students and caregivers across the state.
Great, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
So we'll look forward to hearing more in your next report. All right, back to Dr. Mullenix, Distinguished Leaders Initiatives.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. So this is our second update, and we have not provided full in-depth updates on this project, so some of this might be newer information. This is our Distinguished Leaders in a Remote Environment update. And again, I am joined by some special guests who are here with us today. Rachel McBroom and I are business owners of this project, and she is going to speak toward the end of this project. But I also have Dr. Shirley Prince and Tracy Story, who are with us as well from NC PAPA, and Dr. Prince will provide some information about the evaluation findings. So, as with the previous update, a little bit of background on how we came to utilize the ESSER I funds for this project. In the spring of 2020, sometime between March, April, May-ish, we created, here at the department, we created some roundtable-like sessions. We had some for teachers, and that was really who we were focusing on, but we decided to develop one for school leaders, and just to see if that was a need that would be filled. We had 150 slots for that roundtable session. It was about a 45-minute session. It was really just to have them to come together as a space to talk about some of the issues they were seeing in their schools, and for us to facilitate that time of conversation and fellowship with one another. Within about 10 or 15 minutes of opening the registration up, it sold out. We used an event platform for that, and the ticket registration sold out within about 10 or 15 minutes. So what that told us is that there was a need and a hunger for school leaders to have some support. So as we were transitioning into the summer and we had these ESSER I funds available to us, we reached out to Shirley Prince. She had actually been the guest speaker on that school leaders roundtable session. We reached back out to her and said, we have some funding. We would like to see if we can develop a program that would support our school leaders during remote instruction and remote learning. We knew a lot of our principals were serving as classroom teachers and principals. They were just multitasking. And a lot of them, we were making an assumption they knew what to do, but really a lot of them were grasping also for some ideas and some support. And so this was a way to also help them to build that support with other school leaders across the state. So, of course, Shirley said, yes, we'll be happy to develop something. And so they developed the Distinguished Leadership in a Remote Environment, in a remote learning environment. And Shirley is going to go into greater detail. But just in brief, it is a 3-tiered school leader professional development program aimed at leading within a remote environment. And again, this was filling the need for the time frame of which we were in. The content of this program was fully vetted through our NCDPI staff. Ms. Amy Ryan and Dr. Mary Hemphill Joseph, both former regional principals of the year, reviewed the content, and so it was truly a collaborative partnership. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shirley Prince, and she's going to go into detail and also discuss about the evaluation findings.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mullenix. Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, especially in person. Before I jump into this, I want to thank you for your sincere tribute to our principals and for recognizing so wholeheartedly the important role that they play. And the fact that you wanted to do this initiative is further evidence of your recognition of how important principals are. We were thrilled to be able to work on this project. We knew that there was a lot of angst out in the field amongst our school leaders. We wanted to help them any way that we could. When the department reached out to us, you've got a great team here. I met with them. We talked about what we wanted it to look like. We wanted the program to meet the needs of all school leaders. We know that some school leaders get their inspiration for professional learning from interacting with their peers. Some prefer to be more self-directed. So with that in mind, we developed a three-tiered approach to this. The first tier is a cohort model. And the cohort model, as with all of our curriculum, is replicable. We actually assembled some great thought leaders from across the state, and as Dr. Mullenix said, we worked with some of your staff to make sure that the curriculum met the needs of the immediate situation. As with all of our programs, we started with state and national standards and the competencies, but we wanted to show how those play out in this new unprecedented environment. And that was guiding us as we developed this curriculum. We struggled with which of the components to deliver first because they were all so important. But we chose to start with quality instruction. We thought it was important for our principals to understand the role that they played in helping their teachers develop a shared vision for what quality remote instruction looks like. Then, of course, we knew that there was a need, and that was emphasized to us by your team members here at the department for helping principals understand how are they going to coach their teachers and evaluate them in this totally unfamiliar environment. And so the next component focused on what the school leader does with respect to coaching teachers through this period, helping them feel a greater sense of efficacy, knowing that even our best teachers during this time were feeling very inept. So what was the school leader's role in helping them to feel a greater sense of efficacy? And then also, how were we going to evaluate in a remote setting? One thing that we discovered is that it was sometimes easier to evaluate because teachers were recording their interactions with their teachers and they were able to view these recordings. So that was one of the things that we talked about and emphasized in Component 2. Component 3 was all about how do you maintain and continue to build a positive culture when you are not physically with your staff all the time? How do you communicate with them? The equity piece was huge. How do you assure that your students are able to access your instruction when they may be in parts of the state where they don't have robust internet? So that was Tier 1, the cohort model. And as Dr. Mullenix said, it was open to principals, assistant principals, and instructional coaches. Tier 2, we developed a set of on-demand, standalone webinars. And those are available to our principals now. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And then the last tier, we were able to identify some standout school leaders that could facilitate a peer network. We were able to form a practitioners network, and you see here some of the principals that are working with us. Michelle Baker from McDowell County, Cindy Bliss, New Hanover, Marcus Gauze, Guilford, Patrick Green in Greene County, Robin Hamilton, New Hanover. On the next slide, we have A.J. Hammond From Hope County, we have Dana King from Wake, Suzanne Owen from Cumberland, Carrie Tolbert from Iredell Statesville, and Matt White from Wake. These 10 exemplary leaders are facilitating small networks of principals that in grade-alike groups, and we just launched this back in May, and these groups are meeting monthly under the direction of these facilitators to talk about the issues that they're dealing with, to learn from one another, to really get the wisdom of their peers, what's working, what's not working, what has been tried, lessons learned, that sort of thing. So that's going on right now, and quarterly we bring them together for whole group, at a whole group experience. Next slide, please. Thank you. These are just some of the on-demand, we have 6 of them, the on-demand webinars, and these are ideal for principals to access or anyone to access. It's also ideal for our central offices to be able to use these if they want to hold a district level training for their school leaders. So these are available, and they're moderated by our own just really wonderful school leaders that we have in our state. And some of the program evaluation findings, we had a total of 254 participants that were in the Tier 1. They were in 3 different cohorts. We had almost 86% of them complete the requirements that we have for them earning CEU credit. That, roughly in a nutshell, is that they have to complete 80% of the activities. And all of our activities are applied back to the participant's own school. And so they engaged in 2 synchronous sessions in each month, and then they had facilitated asynchronous sessions. And probably what made those sessions so, not probably, definitely what made them effective was the fact that they were fully facilitated. And these facilitators were engaging with these participants, just throughout their session, and they are also, the facilitators are supported by an online coordinator that makes sure that everybody's staying on track. So we were able to survey all of the synchronous sessions, all of the asynchronous, and then we contracted with an independent evaluator, Grant Pros, Inc., and they did follow-up surveys after the programs were finished. So some of the specific findings on the next slide. This particular slide is a quote from the actual evaluation. And basically what it's saying is out of 140, these are the surveys that we did of the synchronous and asynchronous as the program was in progress. Out of 140 responses, 131 times, 85% of the participants strongly agreed or agreed to the items. And really the only time that it was below 70% had to do with this webinar was scheduled at a time convenient for my participation. As you know, our principals are stretched very thin. The next slide shows the actual follow-up survey done by the independent evaluators. I won't go through all of that in the interest of time, but you can see that the blue and the orange represent strongly agree or agree. So you can see that this program was extremely well received by the participants. The one that I will highlight, because I'm most proud of it, is the top one. It has the highest rating, and it's about the program being led by effective facilitators. These facilitators are our own North Carolina facilitators. We select them very carefully, we train them, we support them, and they do a fantastic job. So as far as next steps, we want to continue our practitioners network. As I said, it kicked off in May. We will continue the small group network meetings, the quarterly meetings, and we want to continue to promote and redistribute the on-demand webinars. And if you as a group decide that you would like to convene additional cohorts of the curriculum that we develop. It would need some updating to have more of an emphasis on a blended hybrid environment that we could do for the amount that you see there. So that is our report, and I'll entertain any questions that you might have if there is time for that.
Thank you, Dr. Prince, and thank you so much for your partnership. This is obviously something that was badly needed by our leaders across the state, and the quick response of this initiative, as well as the previous one, it just testifies to the talent that we've got in this state. We are running a little long, but I will let, if there is anyone who has a question. Dr. Mullenix, do you need to close up before we open it up for questions?
Yes, ma'am. Rachel McBurnell.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prince. As Dr. Prince shared, you saw some of the data that was taken by the participants, but you may also be asking, what did this mean when they got back to their buildings? So they evaluated the effectiveness of the delivery model and what they were taught. And we can take that from the survey responses. These are actual participants, open-ended responses where you can see that they walked away from participating with strategies on how to help provide engaging virtual instruction for their teachers. They also realized, it re-emphasized the importance during that remote learning period of focusing on the social emotional aspect for both their students and their staff. And on the next slide, this is the one that gave me the most hope. This particular participant recognized that, wow, because in the spring, many of our schools were returning to face-to-face instruction, so what they had learned didn't necessarily need to be implemented, but recognized that the role virtual instruction may play moving forward and reaching each child, and that this helped equip them with more tools in their toolbox, which is what we really wanted to do. So with that, again, any other questions?
Any questions from my colleagues before we move ahead? But that is very exciting findings because it is obvious as time goes along that the need for quality remote instruction is not going to disappear. Thank you so much for that presentation. We'll move on to the North Carolina Personalized Assessment Tool. We are going to hear from Dr. Howard to bring us up to date on what's been going on with that with the work that is being done through the U.S. Department of Education Innovative Assessment Demonstration Authority that we were granted 2 years ago, I believe. So, Dr. Howard.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and good morning to everyone. So, as a reminder, in June of 2019, the U.S. Department of Education granted an Innovative Assessment Demonstration Authority to North Carolina. This, of course, came with no funding. This is the opportunity to develop an assessment that for the pilot can run parallel to the current end of grade test to see if we can administer this innovative assessment with the same technical quality and comparability of our current assessments. The individual, the IADA solution is the Personalized Assessment Tool. It's an assessment system that's comprised of 3 interims that lead to a staged adaptive test at the end of the year. The U.S. Department of Education requires an annual report that was submitted to them on August 30th of this year, and likewise, the North Carolina General Assembly requires the department submit a report as well by November 15th. So in this report to you today, we're just going to highlight some of the key activities that have happened in the past year and give you information on what is upcoming in the coming school year. So again, there are 3 interims. They're very similar to the NC check-ins, which I think most of us are familiar with. And the NC check-ins assess students throughout the school year. And the key factor and purpose is to give feedback to teachers and to students so additional instruction can occur throughout the school year with the intent purpose of having increased student achievement on the end-of-year assessment. Now, that end-of-year assessment will be developed to be what we're calling a flexible, adaptive, summative assessment. So it still comes at the end of the school year. It will take information from those 3 interim assessments to position a student in that flexible adaptive, because we're all familiar that adaptive means that not all students see the same items, but all students have the same opportunity to show their achievement level at the end of the year. And what this will do is this will give different students different assessment experiences. And some of the feedback that we've heard in the past several years, and I think you have as well, is that some of our students, when they approach the end of grade assessment, they get very frustrated very soon. They encounter items that they cannot answer, and they just kind of give up, is the reports that we have back to us. So having this flexible, adaptive approach that is using information from the 3 interims will enable us to deliver items to students within the range of their ability, but giving them also through this flexibility adaptive part that they can all demonstrate that they have met level 5 academic achievement level. So that's very important. And some of the conversation that we've had is, can these 3 interim just replace the summative assessment? And while that is very appealing, one of the hesitations there is we always want children to have the opportunity until that very last, latest possible moment to show that they have met achievement level 5. So on these 3 interims, they're not reported out on those academic achievement levels. They're reported out, as you'll see in a few slides, grounded on the content standards, focusing on what they're showing that they know, that then we can add additional instruction. We would be hesitant to make decisions about students throughout the year instead of giving them the entire year to then have an opportunity to show what they know and are able to do. And also the other important thing to remember is that in North Carolina, we have a strong growth model. We've had this growth model, not the same one we have now, but growth in North Carolina for more than 20 years, one of the very few states that have done that. And so part of the operation of growth is to give students as much time as possible to show how much they have grown. So while we are having conversations with our partners at SAS on the potential as we go through this research study, and it is a research study, we do not have all the answers for you today, but we are prepared to have conversations with SAS about the potential of growth from those 3 interims. But we would not want that to be the end of year growth, because those students on those 3 interims would not have had the opportunity to show everything that they know and are able to do. So we were a little bit delayed with COVID, as much of our colleagues were across the state. But we have recouped, if you will, so that this year we are doing 2 grade levels, reading and math. And then next year, 2022-23, we will add 2 more grade levels, reading and math. And in 2022-23, that will be the first year that we actually administer that flexible adaptive summative. We need the data from this year's interims in order to make sure we can build the routing, the system, if you will, for the flexible adaptive in spring of 2023. And then in 2023-24, we will have available in reading and math, all grades 3 through 8th, this pilot opportunity. So in 2020-21, we focused on finalizing the mathematics NC interim specifications for grades 4 and 7. And as a reminder, we do that by engaging our teachers across the state to get their input, their feedback to us on what standards are taught at different periods of time during the school year. So that's very important. We also conducted technology enhanced items cognitive labs with our partners at the Friday Institute. Technology enhanced items, those are delivered online, and it's where the student is manipulating with the mouse, dragging and dropping information. So it's a departure from a typical multiple choice item. Now, in all fairness, our testing experts would say to us that we're really gleaning the same information. They are seen, though, as more engaging to the students. And of course, that is some of the feedback we've heard over the years as well, is that a traditional paper, pencil, multiple choice test is not as engaging for students. We're continuing to collaborate with the Friday Institute for Professional Development for this school year, for the 2021-22. That is very important because we don't want to just deliver an assessment system. We want to engage our teachers and our colleagues across the state, our parents, our students, and what does this assessment system bring to them? How does it relate to instruction? How is it positioned for the individual student and not for the aggregate student population? Very important. In some of our internal conversations, our colleague, Ms. Sneha Shah Coltrane, pointed out to us that we don't want these assessments to send a definitive message on what should then occur for students. It's one piece of information. And an assessment, that is something that we have always stressed about our assessments. It is one piece of information, albeit a very valuable piece of information, but nevertheless, the classroom teacher knows those students very intimately and knows their strengths and their weaknesses. And the hope is that this information just further confirms what they already know to be the case, and to give them more information that they can then use with the students. Because remember, the teachers are going to have access to these items on the NC interims, not the end of year summative, but on the NC interims they would have access to the items. And we think it's very important and that a teacher would be able to see not just that a student got an item incorrect, but the answer selection that the student chose. And that will help the teacher see how the student solved that math problem incorrectly, so how we can correct that thinking so the student can perform better going forward. And we've also put a lot of focus, and this is something that this board, I think, has given us input over the years. We have drafted new individual student reports. These are reports that go home to the parents. And as you look at these reports, one of the things you'll notice is it's not full of all those numbers that you see on the end of grade individual student report. And that's partly to support our perspective of these 3 NC interims. They are for discussion. They are for feedback. They are for formative assessment. They are not to say you met the mark or you didn't meet the mark. So that's why you'll see over to the right, we've identified not numbers on achievement, but approaching or satisfactory. And then you'll see that sliding scale there. So of course in the background, we'll know how many items triggers where that slide lands. But for our users in the field, the important thing, and particularly our parents, is not to look at this report and have all those numbers become a weight and a burden, and for them to say, oh, my student just cannot progress beyond this. But to break it down and see perhaps where the students are doing well and where the students need additional instruction. We have worked very much and will continue to do so, because I think we do have much more work to do in this area, but we're trying to engage parents to get their feedback. We were very fortunate that our EC colleagues opened up to us their meeting with their parent advisory, and we were able to share these reports about a month ago. And so we got that feedback from them. And much of the effort for this coming year is that stakeholder input, not just from parents, but from students, as well as teachers and our colleagues across the state. So we do have voluntary participants. This is how this program works. We went into it very much wanting it to be voluntary, for it not to be required, but to have folks engaged willingly to do this. So the initial application to the U.S. Department of Education had 2 districts and 1 charter school. So started out kind of low. In the 2020-21 school year, we had 180 schools across 14 districts and 8 charter schools. And you can see for this year that has dropped. We have 59 schools across 10 districts and 6 charter schools. And of course, we have also invited, and they have graciously accepted our invitation, the Cherokee Central School. So we're very excited about that. They do use our assessments, have used our assessments for many years, and they have participated in NC check-ins, and they were willing to do this, and we most gratefully appreciate their input as stakeholders into this development. So why fewer volunteers this school year? Well, there's a few reasons. One is changes in leadership at the districts and the schools. So let's just, assume that I'm very engaged at a district, I'm championing for this and I'm talking it up, and then I leave. So in some cases when I leave, then others go, well, we're constantly evaluating in our districts and our schools and what we can do with our capacity and our priorities. And so the decision has been made in some cases to not continue, and that's okay. Also, just the impact of COVID on priorities. I mean, we've heard this morning of all that is happening in our schools and all of the stresses and the pressures on the principals and the teachers and the students and their families and the communities. So we can understand there's a lot going on. So we're just real appreciative of those that have continued to stay with us. The third reason, we did have one district at least that cited this as a reason. And we want to just highlight this for you. So with mathematics, if we stop and think about it compared to reading, you know, we have a saying that we say reading is reading. And of course, that means the content standards are spiraled across the school year. Mathematics, we all know, doesn't function like that. There are certain things taught at certain time periods during the school year. And maybe you're always kind of going back and redoing, but nevertheless, it's more compartmentalized than reading. So we have these 3 NC interims. With this input from teachers, we have to determine what to assess on each one of those. Early on with NC check-ins and with the design for NC interims, we had those set in that order, 1, 2, 3. We have now, based on feedback from last year, and partly because of COVID, we have changed it up, and we are opening up so that the local decision is to which interim to administer when. Now, that is a factor for mathematics, not so much for reading, okay? But for mathematics, that's very important. But even with that, some of our local districts, of course, have pacing guides. And those pacing guides are what their local educators and experts have determined is the best order to teach those mathematics content standards. So we had one district that said, with even being able to mix them up, maybe do 3, then 1, then 2, that they really still did not feel like it aligned with their pacing guide. So we're acknowledging this internally as a primary point that we will have to continue to get feedback. We will continue to have discussions on as we go forward. I will just share briefly that in the beginning of designing and developing the application for this, we were leaning towards only doing reading because we've had more confidence in being able to do reading. And then one of our psychometricians said, if we do reading and we're successful, then the question, it's not going to be a question, it's going to be a directive, go do math. And so we just as well go ahead and grapple with math. This is a research study. This is the point of it. This is the opportunity to do that. So we'll be continuing to have many more conversations with our stakeholders. And you can see here the list of all the different groups that we get stakeholder input from and that we will continue to do so, and particularly around this issue. So the focus of 2021-22 is, of course, the administration of these 3 NC interims. The testing window opened on October 1st and goes through late spring, again, because they're able to administer them when they want to. So we're very excited about that. And our psychometricians will be analyzing the data from these interims to route, to have information for routing for the flexible summative in spring of 2023. And we'll continue with developing for the other grade levels that are being added next year, which is grades 5 and 7. And we will also put a strong emphasis on continuing to design and implement professional development and support. And like everything else with that professional development and support, a key part of that is as we develop it to get feedback from our practitioners who are engaged in this as to does it work, how does it help you, what do we need to do better. So that is the conclusion of what I have to share this morning. And Ms. Kamnitz, of course, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. This is such important work, and it's a relief to hear that COVID has not slowed us down too much. And it looks like we're now about to really take off and start to get that research done and some answers to how this is going to work. So thank you so much for that work. Are there any questions from my colleagues?
Ms. Kamnitz, I know that time is of the essence. This is not quite a burning, but it's a little bit on the warm side question. And it has to do with the parent report. I think is fabulous. I'm wondering, Dr. Howard, would that tool be available, let's say, for a teacher to use it in a parent conference?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And in fact, that's part of the professional development is to do that, as well as the reports that the teacher gets. As part of the NC check-ins at some point, we designed those so it was easier for the teacher to zero in on a particular student and they have more in-depth information that they can share with a parent, where that is more appropriate in a teacher-parent conversation about how the student actually did on those items. But
Absolutely, and explain that, the scale business.
Yes.
That would be
yes.
very important. And the other question has to do with the districts, the schools and districts that are taking part in this study. Are they also running the NC check-ins alongside the interims?
We are encouraging them not to. I don't know of any that are. We are really saying one should do one or the other, not both. I mean, because that just becomes more testing. And our plan right now is for next year is really to merge the two. Because long-term, we would not anticipate running two systems. We would anticipate running only one. And it also falls into, this is a research study, right? So as we go through NC interims and we identify things we want to do that are beneficial for students and teachers to engage in learning, we want to make sure that it's available to everyone, right? So in education, a big part of research is, the difficulty of withholding treatments. So if you think of double-blind studies in medicine, it's a little bit harder to do that in education because we want to do what we know to do, what is best for students as soon as we possibly can. So we really see those two merging together.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you so much. I do have a few others, but we'll get together on those. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Any other questions?
Ms. Kamnitz, this is Keisha Clemens.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, Dr. Howard, thank you so much. Just have a couple questions. One, has there been any feedback about students who, in their IEPs or their individual plans, that are not taking tests? Is there an alternative for them other than the online test? Because I know it's adaptive, so that means it's online.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I probably should have included that in my comments, so thank you. So it is being developed online, but we know we will always have to have paper available for those students who require it through their IEP. We'll always have to have Braille, for example. So we are engaged in that work now. We have surveyed all of the pilot districts to determine exactly how many paper versions they need, and we will continue to do that because our responsibility is that every student participates. And that is a national conversation right now as well. For all assessments, if you think about vendor assessments, that accessibility is a concern, that it does not always happen. But from the state level, we have a huge responsibility to make sure that does happen.
And Dr. Howard, I just want to ask one more quick question. And, oftentimes we talk about the length of the assessment, and a perfect balance of that, of having enough items, to be able to really give you an understanding of how students are performing on the standard. However, not being too long so that kids, you're not just working on stamina. So can you talk a little bit about the length of assessments and any feedback that you've gotten from the pilot districts?
Right. So particularly, I think that comes up with the flexible summative adaptive. The NC interims, are suggested just to have a planning time period of 90 minutes, but we don't anticipate it taking 90 minutes. And we will be going out doing observations with these interims, and that's one of the things we're going to be looking at is the time that it takes in gathering that feedback. The summative assessment, a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, North Carolina, I think the board will remember, reduced the number of items on the test. And at that time, the psychometricians said very clearly this is really as low as we can go and maintain reliability. We're also held by federal law to assessing the breadth and depth of the content standards. So that is very key and very important. And in state assessments required by federal law, that is where the challenge comes with an adaptive model. Because theoretically, and if you'll indulge me, I always give the example of the nursing exam. So my understanding of the nursing exam is adaptive. And so you're not being exposed necessarily to all of the content once you have demonstrated to a certain level that we can pretty much assume you would get all that content correct. But with the federal law that we have to assess the breadth and depth of the content standards, then we're held accountable for showing that we're assessing all of those accessible standards, that we are not limiting. So a true adaptive test, in my opinion, at this point in time, is not as doable for statewide assessment according to federal law. But we're getting as close to that as we can, but that coupled with already reducing the tested items, I would not want to, the perception be that it will be a shorter test. Okay. But our tests are always as short as we can make them. So we are committed to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions very quickly before we move on? All right, thank you, Dr. Howard.
Thank you.
Moving on to action on first reading, SLA 1 is State Board of Education Policy Amendment 2021-22 Read to Achieve Implementation Guide. As we've been hearing over the last several meetings, the work on this guide is ongoing, and it has been coming to us in pieces as the team completed the different parts of the guide. But we've been approving it in pieces so that districts would have as much information as possible to work from as the school year started. So Dr. Ryan, if you will bring us up to date on what we are going to be approving or voting on tomorrow.
Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, members of the board, colleagues, and stakeholders. Thank you for your time today as we present the final components of the 21-22 Read to Achieve Implementation Guide as it pertains to General Statute 115C 83-4. While it's been a huge undertaking, I'm extremely grateful and proud of the collaboration that's happened to make sure this has taken place and the guide is aligned to the new Read to Achieve legislation that was only passed less than 6 months ago. As we focus on the alignment and ongoing literacy efforts to support our educators, students, and families, today we have a team of staff who are going to cover the updated sections of the guide, including sections 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, and 12. Along with the October draft version of the guide, you should have you'll have the November updates in it. You should also have page updates with the changes of the previous drafts for your review. And at this time, I'm going to introduce Dr. Chrissy Day, the Assistant Director of the Academics Division, because she's been our lead for Section 5 in legislation.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm honored to represent the Section 5 working groups today. As a little bit of context, Section 5 of the Read to Achieve legislation states, the State Board of Education shall develop literacy instruction standards to ensure that instruction methods throughout the state are consistent and closely aligned with the objectives of Read to Achieve. The State Board shall incorporate only the most effective literacy instruction methods aligned with the science of reading into the standards developed. While there are additional pieces to Section 5 that are due at a later time, today we bring forward a draft of the literacy instruction standards. Many times when people hear standards, especially in relation to curriculum instruction, they think of the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, the student standards. In this instance, however, the literacy instruction standards are defined as a level of expectation, a definite established way of teaching literacy. They are the essential non-negotiables that set a level of quality and equity to be used consistently within core instruction statewide in every classroom every day. Originally, they were slated to go to the board early next year into LEAs by June 2022, but because of timelines for the intervention standards in Section 6, which you will see shortly, that date has been moved up. This slide highlights a high-level overview of the process used to create the draft of the literacy instruction standards. While the Read to Achieve legislation focuses on early literacy, the Section 5 working teams recognize the need to span the entire pre-K through 12 literacy continuum. Jenny Wilkinson and a group of early learning consultants led the work for pre-K, and the ELA team within the Division of Academic Standards led the work for K-12. The K-12 team was incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Miranda Fitzgerald, Assistant Professor in the Department of Reading and Elementary Education at UNC Charlotte, as well as a key leader during the Michigan Essential Standards development as a partner in this work. Her expertise has been invaluable. Once the grade bands of pre-K, K2, 3-5, and 6-12 were set, the teams dove into hours and hours of research. They identified and studied multiple meta-analyses on literacy. They also conducted hand searches of high-quality empirical journals to study the latest research and findings. For example, the K-12 team over the last 2 months studied 225 meta-analyses and studies. From there, they created a spreadsheet with annotated bibliographies and synopses of the findings. That information was used to identify and flesh out the trends they were finding. The next step was to crosswalk the trends with multiple reliable sources and initiatives, including IES guides, the UNC Literacy Framework, letters, and our North Carolina Standard Course of Study. We also spoke with members of the Office of Early Learning and content experts within the Division of Academic Standards for feedback. Once the standards were in early draft form, we took a look at them vertically pre-K through 12 to ensure that alignment, but still staying true to the research for that grade band. As you can see on your handout, we currently have 12 pre-K standards, 12 K2, 11 for 3-5, and 8 for 6-12. This slide shows 4 literacy instruction standards, an articulation of a comprehension instruction standard that focuses on discussion and writing about in response to text. This particular comprehension instruction standard begins with intentional opportunities for students to construct meaning through interactive read-aloud routines in pre-K, and it goes to constructing meaning through higher order discussion and writing about in response to text before, during, and after interactive read-alouds in K2. From there, it stays fairly similar in grades 3-5, just dropping the interactive read-aloud portion, as the goal is for students to read independently by that grade band. In 6-12, you will again see similarities with the exception of the ending portion within disciplines because of the importance of disciplinary literacy in these grades. As you may have noticed, these are broad general statements, which brings us to our next steps. The teams will continue to gather feedback and revise the literacy instruction standards as and if needed. There are several conferences coming up, including the DPI AIM conference, where we plan to elicit feedback from external stakeholders. The teams will also begin the important work of researching and developing research-informed practices for each literacy instruction standard for each grade band. These will be the verbs, the how-tos, the teacher actions that put specifics with those general broad literacy instruction standards. For the 6-12 band, the practices will be developed for each core content area to support disciplinary literacy. These, along with a preface for each grade band, will come back to the State Board in early 2022. Also within Section 5, DPI will create a model implementation plan that will go to local leaders. This will be based on Mississippi's school-based literacy plan template as well as other states who have implemented similar work. This plan will serve as a blueprint to drive literacy instruction as well as a measuring stick to determine how well the district is providing effective research-based literacy instruction to all students. On the flip side, DPI will also create a non-example that names and explains practices that do not align with the literacy instruction standards and the model literacy implementation plan. Once LEAs receive the literacy instruction standards, the model implementation plan, and the non-example, they will evaluate their local literacy curriculum and instruction methods and modify as necessary. LEAs will then submit a form, a concise explanation of their local literacy curriculum instruction to the State Board of Education. Regional directors and other staff will review and consult with LEA leadership when modifications are needed to ensure full alignment by the 24-25 school year. We will also provide professional development to leaders and teachers with their understanding of the literacy instruction standards, as well as create to-be-determined resources such as possible walkthrough tools or administrator guides to help support districts with this work. Thank you for allowing us to share today. I'm incredibly grateful and proud of the team for their commitment to this important work. And I will now hand it over to Susan Laney.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk to you about Section 6, which has a lot packed into it. Section 6 has two main components, the district literacy interventions. We refer to these as the literacy intervention plans and individual reading plans. And while we will speak to intervention, we want to make sure to make these explicit links back to what you just heard about best first instruction or core instruction. So we certainly appreciate Dr. Day accelerating her timeline so these pieces can be presented to our consumers together. We know that we cannot effectively intervene or install pieces in Section 6 without most of our effort and most of our human capital directed to providing that first best instruction to all students. So what this legislation does in Section 6 is outlines each piece that our districts need to design, plan, and put in place to provide all students with successful literacy support, and our opportunities are spelled out throughout this updated Read to Achieve. Additionally, Read to Achieve prompts us to be forward-thinking in designing and planning our supports for students. So it's really going to encourage our districts to plan ahead in their support instead of being reactive when students experience reading failure. So with that said, even though when we have our best designed and implemented supports for all students, we always must anticipate that we will have students who require additional support or intervention to be successful. So in the past, we've had situations where we've put that burden on individual teachers to react to student difficulties in literacy by determining supports and interventions on their own. But what the details and timelines in Section 6 give us are that gentle accountability that we need to be thinking ahead or proactively about the types and supports that we need to pre-plan for all students to access early literacy. So that pre-planning, that allocation of resources means that we'll have supports ready to implement when we find students who need more than core to meet our common goal of all students developing into successful readers. So the literacy intervention plan you see on the left, previous slide, sorry. So the literacy intervention plan really is spelled out in Section 6. The literacy intervention plan is a plan that is designed at the district level. So Section 6D, Part A, tells us that each LEA submits a plan for the literacy interventions that we'll offer. This includes reading camps. And then we're given further guidance about the literacy intervention plan in Section 6D, Part B, that reads, DPI shall review each LEA's plan and approve those literacy interventions that provide instruction that is closely aligned with the goals in this part and complies with the literacy intervention standards published by the State Board of Education. So that's where we are sort of right now, is then what are these literacy intervention standards? And we define a description of the literacy intervention standards in Section 6K, which is Amy Brown's favorite part of this legislation, which states that we will conduct an analysis of literacy interventions, including reading camps, provided throughout the state to determine which are effective. And based on the analysis, the state board and the department shall develop literacy intervention standards, including reading camp standards, that incorporate the most effective activities and instructional methods. So that's where we are today, is we're seeking your approval on those standards that have been developed. To assist our district with some aligned language, we'll refer to these standards as best practices out in the field. The practices or standards are described in a guidance document that you have linked in your board materials. It's called the Literacy Intervention Standards. It's named as the Literacy Interventions Guiding Document. And these practices are a product of that intervention analysis and include current research on the most effective activities and instructional methods. So that has happened over the course of the past couple of months. And just this guidance rests in the science of reading. It is the body of research that is the science of reading, and also really addresses the link between assessment using DIBELS 8 and intervention. And that's really outlined for us and directed for us to do in Section 6, Part C, Part A. And so then that guidance finally identifies the alignment to a multi-tiered framework of support and provides implementation resources. So in a moment, my colleague Kelly will talk a little bit about how we're going to coach and support districts to use the resources. The Reading Camp Best Practices Guidance document is linked in your implementation guide on page 55, and it follows that same format. So then the other large component of Section 6 is the individual reading plan. The concept of the individual reading plan is first mentioned in response to that assessment data with DIBELS 8 in 6C Part A. And it's really important that we recognize the connection between the district designed literacy interventions and then how those interventions are then installed and applied for individual students based on assessment data as the individual reading plan. So some of our big work is to make sure that our stakeholders across the state see these two pieces as linked and not separate pieces in the legislation. All right, so the details of the individual reading plan are on the next slide. On the left-hand side, you'll see what the legislation lets us know needs to be included. So the first piece is the science of reading-based instruction the teacher will implement. So we've added this first and talk about this first because this is really describing the core support that our teachers implement for all students entrenched in that science of reading. The second piece is the specific skill reading deficiencies identified by assessment data. So this component will align our intervention to the results of that universal screening or that assessment with DIBELS 8. We're pleased that we have an assessment tool that has the utility not only to provide that overall information for all students, but is really sensitive enough to identify where students are experiencing reading difficulty. The third piece you see there is the additional literacy interventions the student will receive. So this part of the individual reading plan will match the appropriate interventions identified in that district literacy intervention plan to individual students and their needs. So that's the direct link from the work from the district perspective. Parts 4 and 5, the goals and benchmarks for growth, will be those goals that we set based on our assessment data that we will use to determine the effectiveness of the intervention, and the means by which progress will be monitored and evaluated. So that's the ongoing progress monitoring work for our students. And then finally, any additional services that the teacher deems appropriate. So back on the previous slide for just one more second. The right-hand column then notes the things that we as DPI will provide to support our stakeholders in the field. So an IRP documentation template that aligns to a multi-tiered system of support. This exists in our statewide system that we offer from MTSS for documentation of both core supports and interventions. The next piece is the providing a checklist and models for district, and then meeting the requirements of aligning the individual reading plan to a multi-tiered system of support documentation. And then also there's some alternative documentation. So you have links to those in your updated guidebook on page 57. Those are also ready for approval. And then you'll hear more about the resources for parents that's noted there in section 8. So just in addition to seeking your approval for the pieces of section 6, what we really hope we're able to show you today is a theme that's emerging. We really want to recognize, align, and build on the important and effective work that is happening across North Carolina. We want to engage in continuous improvement by refining our practices that really encourage our stakeholders and our teachers and our districts across the state to be reflective practitioners. But we really want to do this while balancing any new asks of educators right now. So we really are trying to connect to current work that is happening, current things that have been going on that are working, and really linking some of our cross-departmental support so that this is not a new thing or an extra thing. And my colleague, Kelly Benheim, is going to talk a little bit about that. She is the consultant for the Northwest in early literacy.
Susan. Good morning, everyone. As Susan just laid out, Senate Bill 387 does a phenomenal job of putting in place the framework and guidance that we know is necessary for literacy instruction and intervention. But what we also know is that legislation can only be as effective as its implementation. So that's where the rubber meets the road with this work, and that's what we've been working to do, and you see on this slide. We have begun to work cross-departmentally, creating resources that support this legislation. We have the literacy intervention guidance document, the reading camp guidance document, and the individual reading plan documents as well. And what we have done is we were trying to figure out, as prior district leaders, Susan and I thought, what do we do to make this work in districts across the state? And so what we knew is that as prior district leads, we would need support from state consultants. We would need time to work within our district to process this new information and come up with next best steps that serve our students. We would need opportunities to receive feedback, and we would also need thinking partners from throughout the Department of Public Instruction to help us determine what are the best ways to develop these intervention plans and link them to our individual reading plans at the school level for students. So what we did is we identified an existing meeting structure that already exists. We didn't want district leaders to have to attend another regional session outside of the meetings they already have. So thankfully, my colleague Susan in the IEPS department, we realized they already had 4 sessions planned throughout the year as MTSS coordinators. We met with them. They gave the Office of Early Learning an opportunity to piggyback on those meetings and gave us 2.5 hours of every one of those sessions for us to do hands-on regional support work with districts to support their planning and developing these literacy intervention plans. The first plan is due in March of 2022, so the timeline of these meetings is parallel with the time frame that's listed within the legislation. We've already begun. We've had 6 regional sessions so far. We have our last 2 this week, tomorrow and Friday. And what we have done is the MTSS coordinators have worked collaboratively with the Office of Early Learning. Our early learning consultants are there. Our early literacy consultants are there. And we've also had consultants from the EC division join us as well for these meetings. And so what we know is while this work is legislatively mandated, it was imperative for us to have the goal that districts understand that this is best practice for students and it links to work that is already happening within districts. We don't need to recreate the wheel. We need to take what we know are best practices that we're using and put them within these literacy intervention plans and connect them down to the individual reading plan. Another one of our goals as we worked in these collaborative sessions was for us to show collaboration within the division. And how do we show that collaboration? We all show up for the meeting. So we asked MTS coordinators to also invite their Read to Achieve contacts and anybody else who would be essential in developing these district-wide literacy intervention plans. They were able to bring teams of up to 5, and they received information about the legislation as initial beginning steps in this first meeting, and then they also had times to work collaboratively in small groups. These first sessions were virtual sessions, but they were able to work in breakout rooms, and then the consultants were able to go from room to room and offer support and answer questions. So like I said, we've already completed 6 of these support sessions in 6 regions. We have 2 regions left to go, and we did ask for some feedback. We have the feedback where you can find out the percentage of folks who felt that we met the goal. We were well above 95%, but we were most interested in the formative feedback from our district leaders. So how do you plan to use today's information to support implementation in your district? And so I will read directly from what we heard here. This first one is one of my favorite because I feel like we hit the target with our goal. We plan on having improved district collaboration across department. We love how you all work together and put the puzzle pieces of all that needs to be done together. And so that's what we named this piece, were the puzzle pieces of these literacy priorities. We plan on sharing these timelines with our senior district leadership to ensure understanding. We're going to maximize collaborative efforts with our district level teams. So this model of collaboration seeped its way down to the district levels, and now they're working to collaborate within their districts, which we know is really important for this work to be successful at the student level as it pertains to early literacy instruction. And then finally, we asked, how do you plan to use today's information to support implementation for your schools? And obviously, they said that the information that we shared with them gave them the background knowledge that they needed in order to support implementation at the school level, and also the activities to help introduce and see the connection between the staff development, staff support, and the multi-tiered systems of support was very beneficial for them. So as stated earlier, we have created these guidance documents. These guidance documents are kind of like the reference guide for our districts to use as they begin to develop and implement these literacy intervention plans and individual reading plans. These documents, as Susan stated, are informed by current research, and they give practical application guidance. So it's not just these are the best practices, it's also on the right-hand column, you'll notice in those documents, these are your best next steps and these are resources to support you. So as we move forward with these regional sessions, we're going to dig into these documents with districts so they know how to best use them to create their plans. We also are going to have created templates, and those are in your documentation as well within the implementation guide. Templates for the literacy intervention plan and the individual reading plan. Again, the purpose of this is not to create more work for districts. So what we do know is this does align with those districts who are using ECATS. They can use their documentation from within the ECATS platform to reconcile with the plans we have here. If not, we have created templates for our districts to use. And then we also know that these intervention plans have to be evaluated by the Department of Public Instruction. So what we are doing is creating rubrics that align to these plans so that when these plans are evaluated by the Department of Public Instruction and feedback is given, there is consistency in that feedback across the state based on the rubrics that were used for the documents. So again, links to all of these documents can be found in your updated implementation guide and your information, and I'm going to hand it back over to Amy Ryan to talk about the Digital Children's Reading Initiative.
and I'm going to try to speed us up a bit, but it is this Section 8 we've talked about before with the Digital Children's Reading Initiative. We are ready to go live in November. Our teams have collaborated. We've looked at previous documentation and resources that are out there. We've also created new resources, and so that link is in, it will be linked and live in the implementation guide in November, and it does meet the legislative requirements of aligning per grade level, per component in literacy to help primarily our parents as well as our educators. And the next step for that will be us communicating to districts what their responsibility is as far as making that public facing on their websites, and then continue to add to based on their district needs. And then Section 9, huge shout out to our EC division. One thing I wanted to make sure that we had included in here is not just looking at a vendor and what the vendor says we use for modifications and accommodations, but also what does the federal law say. And so our EC division worked on some guidelines to make sure that we're including all students when it comes to assessment and what that should look like based on every individual child, not just what a vendor might say. We want to be careful to make sure we're prefacing that. The other piece that's a little more in depth that I think we're discussing closed is the alternative assessment. We were charged with bringing you a report, and I think you have a copy of that report for analyzing passage rates to determine one assessment by the next school year, 22-23. Unfortunately, after meeting with multiple divisions, legal, legislative liaisons, we have prior to 18-19, there was no data that was broken down specifically other than children met it through the alternative assessment. Didn't say which vendor, didn't say how. It was just a lump sum of this many students met it through this alternative assessment. 18-19, we finally had our one data point that was specific, that we could begin to look at the different vendors and the comparative utility. However, COVID hit in 19-20, and in 2021 we have 5 different vendors, which pulled 5 vendors off of that alternative list, so you don't have comparative or historical data to do what the legislation has asked us to do. So we've come up with a plan of action with Julian Alhauer and several of our divisions that we will propose to you that is included in that report and our next steps. And then Tanya's going to wrap us up, Tanya Parrish, our section chief, just to let you know there's minor differences in 10 and 12.
Thank you, Amy, and good morning. So as we begin to wrap up our presentation today, Section 10 of our implementation guide is all about enhanced data collection and reports. So using the guidelines within legislation, we are continuing to collect all of the required data that is required through legislation. One thing that I will like to bring to your attention that it will be new for the 22-23 school year is that as you heard earlier in Section 6, the individual reading plans. And so beginning the year of 22-23, that is a new data collection piece that we will be collecting, and that is the number of K-3 students that have an individual reading plan. Other than that, we will continue to collect all the data that our achievement data for our diagnostic assessment. We will continue to collect the data on our alternative assessment as well as all of our reading camp data. In our new legislation, it did ask that we create a uniform template to be used as we create the data. And so we have worked collaboratively with our Division of Accountability, and our team has created a uniform template that will be used to collect all data, and you do have access to that. So we will continue to collect all the data that is required by legislation. One thing that we are excited about, we are, in addition to just collecting our achievement data for our diagnostic assessment, which is a composite score that DIBELS 8 gives us. Within our data collection sheet, we are going to break it down to each probe that is given. So in other words, we will be able to look across the state and we will be able to see, really, analyzing the data, how are our students performing at each grade level in phonemic awareness? Or, how are our students performing across the state and grade levels with reading fluency. So not just looking at a composite score of how did they do, but really dwelling down into how did they perform and how are they achieving. So we're excited about that. You will notice that on the template that has been provided. So we are asking today that you approve Section 10, which is all about the data collection and reports. And then our very last section today that we are asking that you approve is our appendices. And within this, we have created lots of resources that we are excited about and that we truly feel like will help support our districts. So you will notice there we have specific information and resources for our Amplify M-Class assessments. We have new sample parent guardian letters. So for our districts, we always are getting requests about, do you have a letter or template that we can send home about reading camp or about for our third grade? And so we have provided those there for our districts to use as a request. So we heard what they wanted, and we are trying to make sure that we ensure that we give them that. You will also notice in our appendices, we have our frequently asked questions there, as well as all of our KNEC policies. So this is just providing our districts and stakeholders across the state, hopefully the resources that they have requested and that they need to make sure that they do truly implement our new legislation. And so with that, thank you for your attention today. We know we have brought you a lot of information, but we do want to give you a chance to ask any questions that you may have, and myself and my colleagues will be glad to answer those. So thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn to questions, and this is such important work, and the amount of work that's been done in such a short time reflects the urgency of this work. And obviously, there's much work left to be done. Colleagues, I know you've got a lot of thoughts about this important information, but we are running quite late, so I would ask you to keep the questions to short and pointed, if there are any.
This is Olivia again, and I do have a short, pointed question. Number one, how many years did it take you to do this work? This is an incredible document. I want to make sure, though, I want to go back to make sure in my brain I'm processing this. So the connection between the intervention piece, the individual reading plan, and the connection out to MTSS, you are working in regions to help districts understand how all that comes together. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's good.
Absolutely.
And very good. And you've done 6 of those. You've hit 6 regions. More to come, I suppose.
Yes, we've already done 6. We have 2 more, which will take place tomorrow and
Friday. All right. And then I want to make sure this recommendation coming before the board tomorrow is pertaining to sections 5, 6, 10, and 12?
8. 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, and 12.
10, 12. Okay. So 12 sections in the manual.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Good work.
Other questions?
Ms. Kamnitz?
Other questions?
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
this is Keisha Clemens.
Go ahead, Ms. Clemens.
So I just have a quick question and something that I just noticed here, and it might be a question for Ms. Day. I can't remember about the literacy standards in particular. So I noticed on the section when you look at small group instruction across the board, pre-K all the way over, that the pieces about personalized small group instruction is missing from the pre-K and the 6 through 12. So can you provide some more feedback? Is that just feedback from the Office of Early Learning, that those are not appropriate at those?
What we found in the research is when you're looking at core, sometimes that's not exactly what's prevalent in the research. But what will come out is in the practices, that's where that will come out. So for example, when you're looking at 612, if you're thinking about disciplinary literacy, some of the pieces for some of the comprehension, you want to do that in small groups. So when we flesh out those practices, that's where you'll see more of that small group spread out across all of them.
But it's still absent from the overall piece.
Yes,
Okay.
they'll play a part, small group will play a part in those other pieces.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that presentation. Let's move on to SLA 2, which is the 2020-21 Read to Achieve data report. Much of the data reporting for that year was waived, but there are a few data points that we do have to report on. So Dr. Ryan, if you'll quickly go through those with us.
So thank you again. And then we've tried to go ahead and capture the Read to Achieve reporting requirements on that next slide. And I think Tanya or we'd already reported the difference is mainly that number 5, collecting that transition data beginning for kindergarten. But we also are looking at the way we collect interventions. Right now it's quite cumbersome. And so we'd like to look at, as we're collecting interventions from districts, what's effective, what's making a difference, rather than just a random pool of things, because sometimes that's what it turns into, depends on who's reporting. So we do want to look at improving that process. But these are the reporting requirements we have here. And then considering the pandemic, it's extremely important now than ever. I know we've said this repeatedly. The purpose and intent of this data is for teachers and parents to use in planning and implementing effective resources aligned to student learning and where they are. The specific report is not intended to be used for accountability. That was waived due to the pandemic this year. And so for the Read to Achieve end of year reporting, the test coordinators reported that by August 2021. And in 18-19, 71% of our students were proficient or demonstrated proficiency. In 2021, 38% of our first graders were proficient. And then in 18-19, 78% of our second graders were proficient, and only 43% were proficient in 2021. Third grade, we had in 18-19, 57% of our kids demonstrated grade level reading proficiency on the BOG, the EOG, the Read to Achieve, or the retest, the summative assessments, and only 43% of those students in third grade were proficient during the pandemic. In 18-19, 24,000 third grade students were eligible for priority enrollment in reading camps after removing good cause exemption students. 11,000 attended. 20,000 were still retained or reading retained. In 2021, 37,000 third grade students were eligible compared to 24,000 before. 17,000 students attended and 34,000 were retained or reading retained. It goes without saying, our earliest learners took a hard hit during this pandemic. And now more than ever, we have to ensure there's a solid plan in place to support the gaps that have been created during this time. It's not easy work. We recognize the difficulty for our principals, our teachers, and the adults. There were several limitations we need to look at. The limitations are to be aware of the pandemic itself and what it created. Schools operated on varying schedules and modalities throughout the year. The scenarios were erratic depending on the districts and the schools. Additionally, 5 vendors were used for the first time to collect the data, so we have no consistent data for historical comparison to the multi-vendors. We learned that vendors have varying benchmark scales, data collection means, and not all are created equal. Lastly, the multi-vendor contracts were directly implemented with each district, so this created endless hours of working on missing UID numbers, missing data, and other concerns caused by the variance in the validity of the data in this process. Recognizing those limitations, we also thought it was important, though, to collect a little more data, which had been started with the Belk Foundation, ExcelinEd, FCR, and FCRR, with the direction we were headed with Science of Reading in North Carolina. And I felt like this was really important because we are on the right track, but unfortunately it's hit us before this work is beginning. We did collect data to gauge teachers' essential knowledge and skills to kind of see what kind of baseline do we have for teachers with Science of Reading and what teachers know about the Science of Reading, as well as what do we need to do to support them. A stratified sample of 350,000 teachers were represented. 20 items were on the survey that we sent out. Factual knowledge, there were 9 items, and application items, there were 11. Overall, teachers performed better on factual knowledge. Those questions where we started some of the foundations of reading, research to classroom practice. Some of those things, some districts had already started with letters. So foundational knowledge, about 60% of the teachers were able in first grade to answer 7 of 9 questions, and 60% of grades 2 through 3 were able to answer 6 of 9 questions correctly when it came to content knowledge and factual knowledge about Science of Reading. However, fewer than 40% of all K-3 teachers could understood the application because we had not done any training necessarily. So with that alignment of the new legislation and the support of our superintendent, school board, and external partners, the direction we were headed to support educators is our primary focus. will change the trajectory of our North Carolina children. As you're aware, we've shared on numerous occasions, our arrows are aligning from pre-K to our institutes of higher ed. Voyager-Sopris is in the final stages of planning Unit 1 PD with all cohort districts. They've even began sending planning documents to Cohort 2 next week. They'll get those, then the Google planning forms the following week, and then they'll start meeting with districts in Cohort 2 the week of November 1st, or the first week in November. And that's to try to be proactive with that January deployment. We're also working on transition planning and sustainability plans based on what districts already have in place and what they need. We recognize educators have a lot of pressure on this year. Times are extremely difficult, but there's a fine line we need to be mindful of as we focus on how to provide the best support. With that said, one thing that we must always remember is our why. While this may be difficult for us as the adults, if we don't make literacy our number one priority outside of safety, our children will have it far more difficult than we do, not only for a couple years, but for a lifetime. So hopefully that helps with the support, and I'll entertain any questions, Ms. Kamnitz.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Wendell.
Go ahead, Mr. Hall.
I don't have a question, I have a statement. It validates, the data validates to me, here again, after years and years and years, nothing replaces a qualified teacher face-to-face with a group of students on a daily basis if we are going to impact positive achievement for our kids. Nothing. That's what it says to me. The numbers might look bad or whatnot, and we know why. Taking nothing from our state, because they went through and is going through a great deal of agony right now, and trying to, and I'm not used to the word catch up. It's not catch up. It's providing appropriate instruction. But it has to be face to face with that qualified teacher. That's what it says to me. Put all the lipstick on a pig, and put glasses on, and put a wig on. Under all of that stuff, that's a pig. If you understand what I'm saying, that's my analogy. And I thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that information, but nothing replaces a teacher in a classroom.
Absolutely.
Madam Chair, it's Mr. Ford.
Go ahead, Mr. Ford.
Hard to disagree with that. I had two quick questions. The data captured on the slides, I think, 4 through 6, the screenshots. First question, are these data broken out by student demographic and subgroup at some point?
Yes, and there's a report that's it's broken down more specific.
Okay, that's quick. And then also, could you tell us a little more about when you talk about the survey findings and data analysis? It says teachers in both grade bands were less successful when answering application questions. Can you tell us more specifically what you mean by less successful?
Absolutely. So when we did the survey, and even when we talk to teachers now, they have a general knowledge of what the science reading is and how to break those down by the essential components in literacy, early literacy. But when they're trying to apply those and respond to instruction or where there are gaps or accelerate students, there was a little more gray. There's a little more confusion that will come in the training that they are receiving with Voyager-Sopris is how do you respond when a child has this particular need, or how do you make sure that these skills have been mastered before moving on to accelerate those students. So when it came to the actual application they could talk about it, but maybe didn't know how to apply that based on some data that they have. For example, when we do balanced literacy, a lot of times, even as an administrator, I would find that teachers focused on standards, which is great, but how do you get to the root cause and the skill? And so just really digging in to know how to look for that lowest deficit in some places, there was confusion around some of those pieces.
And is there a number or a range of how less successful, like 20%, 30%, like is there a range?
I can get the breakdown, and there's actually going to be an EdNC report, the full report that's going to come out that we can share as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Kamnitz, this is Catherine.
Yes, go ahead, Superintendent Truitt.
Thank you. These numbers are really hard to hear, and I have no doubt that you all feel the same. Amy, you talked about our why. That's why we all do this work. It's why our teachers and our administrators do the work that they do. And this absolutely needs to be part of our why. To Mr. Ford's point, I haven't seen the disaggregated data from this report, but I have it memorized pre-pandemic. And what it tells us is that 67% of 8th graders in North Carolina start high school not reading proficiently. 28% of Hispanic students start 9th grade reading proficiently, and 14% of African American students do. So we can only guess what that disaggregated data looks like post-pandemic, given these numbers. There's a word that keeps coming to mind, that 4-letter word, fair. There is nothing fair about this. It's not fair to our students. It's not fair to our teachers. What we are asking teachers to do, regardless of the pandemic, I mean, this was in the works before the pandemic, everyone. The shift from whole language and balanced literacy to the science of reading, or a phonics-based approach to early literacy instruction, was coming down the pike pre-pandemic. Thank God. And so what we're asking teachers to do isn't fair. And we realize that. But it has to be done. We can't continue to have 24,000 students graduating from 3rd grade not able to read. 3rd grade reading is the #1 academic predictor of post-secondary success. And this cannot continue. And to your point, Mr. Hall, these statistics pre-pandemic have been frozen in time for 30 years. And so we must change this trajectory, and we have to use science and data to do it. And what you all have done today is show us, through your dedication and that of the teachers you're working with in the field, that we can do this. And we are well on our way. And you know what else? Our colleges of education are on their way too. And that is going to make all of the difference for all of our students.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Hey, this is Keisha Clemens. And I would be remiss not to, Mr. Ford had the same question I had in hearing Superintendent Truitt. I just wanted to make one more comment. Ms. Ryan, your team is doing such a great job in thinking through this. And I am still very concerned about, our students that we know typically have been marginalized, and having that report, I think, has to stay at the forefront of what we are doing. And so when we think about the plans that we have for districts and the individual student plans, do we have pieces in there that is forcing and challenging us to think of how we be culturally responsive? It's more than just the literacy instruction and quality, which is important, but even with that, we have to think about how we're going to be culturally responsive to our students so that we don't see this disproportionality in our student achievement.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, and there's a couple things happening. The reason we have IAPS with us is because we look at both sides of that triangle to look at the whole child in those pictures. While we're doing individual reading plans here, what other data goes into those plans as far as the templates, and that's something we can continue to talk about. Also, when we are having these regional meetings and ongoing, I think it's NC PAPA conference, AIM conference, we are collecting all data to come back so that we can make edits before we put these into place at a later time. So I appreciate any feedback, because that's a great point, and we're trying to look at all angles, not just, while literacy is huge, what other factors could be impacting the specific children.
Hi, it's Miss Floyd. Sorry. Hello, everyone. I just had a quick question. I know that I've been really privileged to have the opportunity to visit several districts, and some of them are in cohort 1. And a question that did come up was, in cohort 1, they do have a deadline, and I love what Superintendent Truitt said. There is an urgency right now for our children, and I completely agree. And I know they have a deadline to finish with their training. They have like a deadline to finish their first volume, their first implementation of the first units. With that adjustment being that we did have a slight delay in the contract approval, will that guideline or that calendar of expectation be adjusted? just because I know as educators, we want to do this work with fidelity, and it's not gonna be any use to our children if we're not doing it correctly. So I just wanted to know if there was any adjustment in that calendar that I recently heard about from my colleagues.
Absolutely. So when we met with Cohort 1, now district leaders have the final say.
Okay.
Voyager Sopris works with district leaders. They look at their calendars and determine that. Cohort 1, where it should have ended at the end of the year, has been extended all the way into the workdays for next year. So as long as it's within that 2-year time frame, they can, and Charlotte Meck has a beautiful, beautiful organization chart that they use where teachers have choices. It's not always perfect scenarios. We still have people who have 2 jobs and they have families.
Absolutely.
But we've asked districts to consider, purposeful abandonment. What are some things you could remove that have been traditions before to prioritize some of these pieces to move our children forward? So yes, to answer your question, they have an extension.
And I think that extension is really important, especially right now more than ever. Thank you so much, because I know that some districts are having the difficulty. When we think about teachers taking professional development, that is teachers leaving their classroom in order to receive the professional development. So that means there needs to be substitutes or someone there to support the classroom in their absence. So I know that some districts are having a little bit of difficulty in that area at this time. So having that extension in place and just taking that into consideration so that we can make sure that we're giving children the very best instruction with this new professional development work is really important. So thank you.
Other questions, colleagues? This is really powerful discussion here. Anything else that anyone wants to add before we move along? All right, thank you, Dr. Ryan. Once again, I echo what everyone has just said in terms of the importance of this work, the commitment that your team has made to getting this done, both with a sense of urgency and a sense with, I think, as Ms. Floyd just said, fidelity as well, and making sure that we provide our teachers with the tools they need to give our students the experience they need. So thank you, everyone, for that. SLA 3 is the Council on Educational Services for Exceptional Children Annual Report. This is the 24-member council that serves as in an advisory function to the state board. And this will be the first time we've heard from them in 2 years. We did not get a report last year. So Ms. Thomas, if you would like to start us off, please.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and even more of a pleasure to introduce to you our Vice Chair of the Council on Council on Educational Services for Exceptional Children. That is a mouthful in and of itself, which is why we use an acronym most of the time. Dr. Hutchinson comes to us with a lot of history and work with students with disabilities, and we have been thrilled that she's been on the council and now serving as the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Sherry. Madam Chair, Superintendent Truitt, it's an honor to serve these students. It's also an honor to serve all individuals with disabilities across the state of North Carolina. As Sherry said, in the world of EC, we live with acronyms, so I will spare you as many of those as I can today. I appreciated the comments a few minutes ago about our why, and so we're not asking for any action. We realize that we were not able to present last year for obvious reasons. However, I'm just going to take a few minutes of your time today and would be happy to answer any questions. As the chair said, we are a very diverse group. We have approximately 24 members. We cross the state. I think one of the most ideal things about our council is we cross various sectors of private school, public school, vocational rehab, community, charter, higher education institutions, and private businesses. We also have numerous parents and individuals with disabilities that serve on our committee, so they are able to voice from a cross-section of our stakeholders. I think it's always important, as you said earlier, our why, and one of my heroes, Christopher Reeves. These folks that are serving, we have endured the same things that teachers have endured over the last year and a half, and so we have had to rethink the way that We meet and engage our stakeholders. So this past year and a half has not been the easiest. However, and we're going to skip over that one. You've got a list of our members. We have 3 primary subcommittees and our executive committee that meets on a weekly basis to set our agendas. We meet quarterly, September, December, March, and June, and I'm thankful for the use of your room typically when we have in-person meetings. In the year 1920, somebody mentioned it earlier, and flip to the next slide. One more. Yes. So we started off our year, which could not have been more appropriate, focusing on school-based mental health. That was an absolute top priority of ours at the beginning of that year. We did not know what we were leading into when just a short months later, we went into a worldwide pandemic, and mental health became the priority for everybody, not across our nation, but across our world. So we spent a lot of time looking at how mental health CPR was administered across the state, and most importantly, if it was being accessed by our teachers, administrators, and finally, students with disabilities. We look every year at the SPP APR, and I apologize for that acronym, our State Performance Plan and Annual Report, and so we get that update from the department, and we are able to engage in feedback as well as provide them priorities. That year, in the year 1920, we looked at risk ratio. As many of you might know, disproportionality is an important factor for us. And Superintendent Truitt, you mentioned just a few minutes ago the risk ratio of discipline, identification, and placement of students. And obviously we have our typical populations that are marginalized in those areas. So trying to provide feedback to the department and division on that area. We look every year at our dispute resolution. In the year 1920, the numbers did seem to escalate. However, nothing to compare to the year 2021, when we all went to remote and we had to rethink how do we teach students with disabilities in a remote world, and most importantly, our most significant students with disabilities in a remote world. The Office of Special Education Programs did come to visit our division in January of 2020. And we are still awaiting all of that formal report to review, but some of our members did participate in that federal programs visit. We are awaiting some guidance and any kind of wisdom that they might be able to offer us. At the end of the year 1920, as you might recall, the identification area of exceptionality area of autism changed its policy and eligibility, and so we were able to offer feedback as we have numerous members who are advocates across the state, and we do have a high percentage of folks who work in the area of autism. Moving forward to the 2021 school year, this past year we did start the year off with our council training, always a great way to train boards and make sure our focus is on the right thing. We did talk in the first few months on our IEP contingency plans. As you all know, we went from in-person learning in in March of 2020 to almost the full state started remotely in August of 2020, which then required every IEP team across the entire state to develop a contingency plan. And one of the things that came to our council pretty frequently was the inadequacies, and as Superintendent Truitt said, the word fair or equitable was very different from district to district. So that became a conversation point for us. Different districts had barriers with remote access. Different districts had barriers with transient populations. Different districts had barriers with access to the school buildings, given their numbers with the pandemic. So that became a primary focus, and we did get a number of public concerns regarding the differences from district to district and how they develop those contingency plans, but ultimately it is an IEP team decision. Then we took a look at the state testing data, and as we know, last year and the year before, we had some waivers or portions of waivers from state testing and accountability, but looking most specifically at how did those waivers impact our students with disabilities. Again, we took a look at the SPP APR, And that was not as robust as it was the year before, as things like our April 1 child count were modified a tiny bit due to the pandemic and inability to collect that data correctly. Finally, there was a shift in our LEA self-assessment due to the pandemic in March of 2020. So we modified how we reported back as districts on our self-assessment. And again, this year we are modifying that, but we as a council take a look at the trends, and the division provides us feedback on where their priorities are based on every LEA self-assessment submission. This past year, we've been given the opportunity to look at the trends in statewide complaints. And obviously, you can all imagine the numbers of referrals increased for various reasons. And so those trends we're still weeding through that, but really helpful to have collaboration of the division to kind of look at that data. And then finally, at the end of the year 2021, there was a large concern presented to the council about EC teacher licensure. And as you all have alluded to throughout the day-to-day, there is no harder hit area than special education when we want to talk about underserved teachers in the state of North Carolina. And one of the things that is a great barrier for us is our EC teachers that are serving our population on alternative standards. You mentioned that earlier with alternative assessments. And those teachers passing certain requirement standards and praxis exams when the content they teach is certainly not aligned. So we're hoping to provide you some guidance and would love some flexibility on that praxis exam for our teachers that serve our students on alternative content standards. There's no greater disability in society than the inability to see a person as more, as Robert Hansel said. And I am happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchinson, and I'm sure that my colleagues would join me in thanking you and the entire council for the time and attention that you give to this very important part of our student population. Any questions for Dr. Hutchinson before we move on? Again, thank you for your work. We have 2 action items. The first is SLA 4, changes to the 2020-21 student performance data. Dr. Howard is going to just run us through this quickly. We received this full report last month and are going to need to approve it tomorrow. But as I think Dr. Howard indicated last month, there is an opportunity for districts to provide data correction, and she's going to review that with us.
Thank you, Ms. Chemnitz, and good morning. So yes, we did have a data correction window September 2nd through the 10th, and as a result of that, we had a total of 98 schools that had a data change, including cohort graduation rate for 66 schools. So overall, the 4-year cohort graduation rate increased by 0.1 percentage points to 87.0%, and the overall 5-year cohort graduation rate increased by 0.1% to 88.7%. And we would also like to note that the state goal for cohort graduation rate for 2020-21 was 89.5, and 33 districts met that for 28.7% of all districts either met or exceeded that statewide goal. Thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Howard before we move on to SLA 5? The 2021-22 Alternative Schools Accountability Model options. We saw this last month. Dr. Howard, any changes?
No, there has not been any changes or any input since last month's meeting.
All right, thank you. And finally, we have an item for discussion, SLA 6, Career and Technical Education Course Inventory and Essential Standards. Mr. Michael, if you'll go ahead and run through this with us so that we can understand again. I will point out, though, that these revisions will be effective for the 22-23 school year. So we're looking out into the future here a little bit. So, Mr. Michael.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. I promise to be brief. Ms. Chemnitz and Dr. Oxendine Thank you for allowing us to update the board on the CTE course inventory and essential standards. CTE has been working very hard to continue much of the work started in 2018-19 as the U.S. Department of Education and the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education required each state to develop a new state plan for the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act of the 21st Century, also known as Perkins 5. To recap our work very briefly over the past few years, 2019-20 was our transition year from Perkins 4 to Perkins 5. During that year, we set performance indicator baselines. We built career pathway programs of study, built out our comprehensive local needs assessment, which we find extreme value in for our local districts, built out our credentials as a measure of program quality, and of course, something that we're very proud of, added and infused the Big Six in essential employability skills as a framework for many of our courses. 2020-2021 was our first year of full implementation. What a great year to try and do that. But you know, you make the best out of what you're given, and you move forward positively, and you do great things for children every single day. The course inventory and essential standards document presented today is for the 2022-23 academic year. This is far out in advance so that our local districts have time to prepare printed materials that they distribute to parents and students. In your board materials, you received an edited, which I apologize was very messy looking strike-through version of our proposed CTE course inventory, as well as a summary of changes. Hopefully that summary was helpful in your going through that long document. Over the next several slides, I'll provide a highlight reel of these changes. To begin, courses have been revised to reflect updates for several reasons. Number one, updated aligned industry credentials. This is for multiple courses. Anytime there's a change from a vendor, from a credential of value, we need to reflect that change appropriately in our documents, so we do that. Updated work-based learning opportunities. Again, multiple courses as things change and opportunities arise for children. One of which was one that the board approved. Several months back, we added the entrepreneurial experience as an SB-approved fourth option for work-based learning for academic for all program areas and clusters. Additionally, we did transition one course, Horticulture 2, Turf Grass Management, to local course option. I had no idea, but as I go across this state and learn more and more, I learned that turf grass is very different from the sand hills to the northwest. So it is best and most appropriate for that work to be done locally, and so we want to encourage that as a local course option. Last year, we did have one course duplication. It was literally copy and pasted in multiple areas. We've eliminated that extra duplication. We updated all of our middle grade courses due to some course code requirements. I'll go through those on a future slide. And then, of course, we revised and added courses in all of our program areas. So for some technical reasons, the CTE division revised its course coding structure for middle grades courses. Previously, our middle grades courses used 7 digits. You'll see an example of that in just a moment. The new structure provides each with a unique 4-digit course code, provides us a lot of advantages from a monitoring perspective of how many children are enrolled in each. And as a result, we went ahead and took the time and the opportunity to, if we're going to go ahead and change all these course codes for our local constituents, let's add full course descriptions so that parents and students can be more informed about the modules that they'll be taking in middle grades. So here's a brief example of that. I just picked up 2 from the document. And I can't see those because I've had my contacts changed, so I will just believe that that's business, finance, and marketing education. I made it so I could read up close. Now I can't see far away. It's always a trade-off when you get older. And of course, computer science and IT education. And what you see there on the far left is the 7-digit enumeration. And in the column in the middle, you see the 4-digit course codes, which are unique. That allows us the advantage of now really, and there's a lot of technical stuff behind this that my colleague in the back could explain much more eloquently than I, but effectively when you track students and you track enrollment to see how much penetration into the market you're getting with children, you want to know that. And it only picks up to 4 digits in many cases, so this gives us that advantage. Last year, we actually had to, or this academic year, I'm living in multiple years, this academic year, those changes are already executed in PowerSchool. There's no change for a local PowerSchool manager. They go and they select the course title, the course number to them. They don't even notice that there's a change. Wanted to update you on that. Excuse me. So next up are our high school courses, and you've had this list. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about this. What I'll hit are the highlights. Many of these are course revisions or title changes. Oftentimes what we have as we go throughout the process, we look at as many of our courses in each year as we can, talk to business and industry on a constant and continuous basis. As we find the need to update a standard, could be a standard that we update, could be a new topic that we add, could be that our percentage of time allocated to certain topics needs to be adjusted. So our teams make those adjustments as they go throughout the year. In agricultural education, you see the moving of turf grass management to local course option. In business, finance, and marketing education, you do see one new course addition. This is IB Business Management. And this is a highlight for us. We've had these courses for a number of years, IB International Baccalaureate courses. We've had a number of these. But this year, we added these officially into our document in partnership with the Division of Advanced Learning and Gifted Education. Again, they've been offered for many years. This is the official incorporation of those into our course inventory. We also offer a number of AP courses that have been in the guide traditionally, those also with the Division of Advanced Learning and Gifted Education. Career Development Education, we had one course revision and title change. That is actually one of our IB Personal and Professional Skills courses, and that course, of course, is now officially listed in our document. Computer Science and IT Education, we are always chasing this one, and I think that's okay. We've become comfortable with constant change there. You do see a couple of new courses there, Adobe, artificial intelligence, some of the things that we know we need to get ahead of in our classroom, so we'll be adding those in 22-23 as well. Family and Consumer Sciences, we have one significant change there. Previously, or this current year, teaching as a profession is a two-level course, or two-course sequence. In the second level course, traditionally, the child experiences a field-based experience, a work-based learning. What we have learned from our local constituents is that is somewhat difficult to schedule as a double block. So we broke that course out. There's now 3 courses listed, but the same number of credits that were available previously. Health Science Education, you see one new course addition that was an IB course. Very excited about that. And one of our largest areas, and really one of our most impactful in this state, is trade, technology, engineering, and industrial education. This area houses all of our automotive, our construction trades, engineering, firefighter, and public safety, and you see a long list there of courses that we have worked on throughout this year. The last thing I'd like to mention is some additional pilot course concepts for 22-23. These are things that are just starting to be developed. We have done some business and industry work on these. One of those is Hospitality and Tourism Management 1 and 2, really focusing on the management of hospitality and tourism. There are a lot of opportunities in this state for our students to be credentialed, to go into post-secondary education, whether that be 2-year, 4-year, and jump into a great career. We've got a lot of options. You've all traveled this state. It's beautiful. So many fantastic options. Let's prepare our children to be in those industries so that we own those jobs and not someone else. And then secondly, solar, I'm going to try and say this, photovoltaics 1 and 2. Solar panels, right? This will focus on the installation and maintenance. It's a little different. It's very heavy in the technical side. That's really where the bulk of the jobs will be in the future. We've talked about alternative energy, and we know that that's a critical area, but we also recognize that our consultant in construction trades is very new, and we don't want to burn him out and lose him because he's done a great job so far. any questions from you all?
Questions quickly. I know we're all ready for a break. Hearing none, just if I could point out to the board that we have 5 consent items in our committee. All 5 of them are reports to the JLEOC or the General Assembly, and they are as follows. SLA 7, North Carolina High School Diploma endorsements. SLA 8, 2020-21 5th grade career awareness program. SLA 9, career and college ready graduate program. SLA 10, 4-year cohort graduation rate. And SLA 11, students with disabilities definition of residence. And Chair Davis, I am giving this back to you. I think we just set a record for going an hour over our scheduled time, but again, very much important, a lot of important things going on that we really needed to give time to. So I appreciate everyone's patience as we went through this very lengthy agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz, and well done. That was some incredibly important work. But we will now take a break for lunch, and we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock. Please stand by if you're in the room.